Welcome back to the Photo Banter podcast. Before we get into today's interview with photographer Pete Souza, just wanted to let you guys know about a new thing I started to help support and grow the podcast. I started a Patreon page where you can go and support the podcast. I'm going to have different features where you can get the podcast episodes 2 days early, as well as another tier where if you want to get a free advertisement for your business or your social media on the podcast, you can join. So if you've been enjoying the podcast the last 3 years and feel like supporting, it'd be much appreciated. I'm hoping to kind of keep this thing going and keep it growing and hopefully get more guests and more content for you guys to learn and just feel inspired by. So if you feel like checking out the Patreon page, you can go to patreon.com/thephotobanter. You can go there, support, and check out the different features I'm going to be offering. Again, that's patreon.com/thephotobanter. I'm going to put the link in the description and on my social media. But yeah, thanks so much for all the support over the last 3 years. I've been loving doing this podcast and just kind of hoping to keep it growing and keep it going and just get more guests and whatnot, So really appreciate the support and thanks so much. Welcome back to the Photo Banter podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gagne, and on today's podcast, I speak with photographer Pete Souza. Pete Souza was the chief official White House photographer for President Barack Obama and the director of the White House Photo Office. Pete's book, titled Obama: An Intimate Portrait, which documented the entire 8 years of Barack Obama's presidency, was published in 2017 and debuted #1 on the New York Times Bestseller list. Pete previously worked as a national photographer for the Chicago Tribune newspaper, based in their Washington bureau, and also worked as an official White House photographer for President Ronald Reagan. Pete Souza is someone who has accomplished a lot over the course of his photographic career and someone who I have an immense amount of respect for. So I was really excited to get a chance to speak with him. So I hope you enjoy it, and thanks so much for listening. All right, well, Pete Souza, I just want to welcome you to the podcast. Really excited to talk to you. I guess to start off, I was kind of curious kind of where you grew up and how you kind of discovered photography initially.
Yeah, I grew up in South Dartmouth, Mass, just about 60 miles from Boston. And just jumping right to college, I went to BU, Boston University, for those of you outside of Massachusetts. Let me turn my mail off here because
No problem.
it's pinging. So I went to Boston University with the hopes of becoming a sports writer, actually. Okay. And then in my junior year, I took a photography class. And that was it. I was like, this is what I want to do. The whole magic of photography and being in a dark room and kind of controlling the process from start to finish. But so right away, I knew that's what I wanted to do. It took me a while to get to the point where I was any good, but I knew right away that for the first time, really something had struck me as like a lifelong passion.
Yeah, and I actually talked to one of our mutual friends last night before this, Brad Mangin, and he actually told me an interesting story about from your dorm room at BU, you heard the famous Carlton Fisk home run. He told me when you're.
Yeah, that's a true story. Brad's a good friend of mine, and because we both have a love of baseball. And it wasn't a dorm room; it was an apartment on I think it was Park Drive. So I was several blocks from Fenway, maybe like even a half a mile. Between a half a mile and a mile, I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
In this particular apartment, and it was a nice October night. I had the window in my apartment open, and was watching the game on a little black and white TV in my apartment with the window open. And when Fisk hit that home run, of course, I'm, jumping up and down in my apartment. I was watching it by myself. and it took like maybe 8 seconds for the sound to carry. So I was like jumping up and down, and all of a sudden you hear this huge roar coming from Fenway Park. So it was sort of one of those moments that you never forget, especially if you're a Red Sox fan. And that was such a classic World Series game.
Yeah, it's amazing. And when you kind of first picked up the camera, like what kind of stuff were you photographing? Was it photojournalism and this kind of documenting, telling stories kind of from the get-go for you? Or what do you kind of remember about kind of some of the early stuff when you kind of got into photography, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting out, I was doing whatever assignments we were handed. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest hurdles for me was that I was kind of a shy person. And, and being in the journalism school, it was challenging for me to photograph people and get close to them. And I was still sort of working out how to go about doing that. And, and I don't know how successful I was. I think one thing that really sort of took me to a different level in terms of photojournalism was my senior year, which was Ken Cobrey, his first year at BU. He got me an internship with the AP, with the Associated Press in Boston.
Wow.
So suddenly I was like, at the Boston Celtics games, I was covering news assignments. I got this photograph of Jackie Kennedy, who was visiting somebody in the hospital. I went to a Muhammad Ali press conference.
Wow.
So I was sort of more indoctrinated to news photography that semester that I did that internship. And then, quite frankly, my portfolio was not good, and I interviewed for a couple jobs when I graduated from BU and didn't get them. So I went to work for my uncle's business for a year, which had nothing to do with photography. And then went to grad school at Kansas State University. And the best part about that experience was they had like a great college newspaper that considered themselves like a real daily newspaper.
It was called the Chicago
Tribune,
right?
That's really where I developed, I think, my skills honed my skills as a photojournalist. So it was really in Kansas where I kind of feel that I got started on the right track in terms of photojournalism.
It's kind of amazing to hear you say you were kind of a shy person and being a photojournalist, because myself, like viewing your work, I'm like, wow, this guy must have guts, being some of the stuff you've documented, these tense moments, traveling to Afghanistan, all these like intense situations. So you feel like that's this kind of skill you build on as a photojournalist, being able to communicate with people and kind of building that confidence as it kind of gets stronger year after year, the longer you did it, you think?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is my high school classmates are like trying to, wrap their head around, the person I am today. Because I honestly, I was just very, very shy and socially awkward and in high school. And I guess, you sort of you grow during your life and you evolve. And I mean, I could, 25, 30 years ago, I couldn't have done a podcast because I would have been too nervous about, doing an interview or something like that. I think it's just, you go through, I mean, the one great thing about photojournalism for me is it's just given me so many great experiences. And I think as a result, I've become more confident in myself and have somehow, learned to deal with people maybe a little better.
Yeah, because it's pretty amazing. I actually went and saw you speak maybe two years ago in Boston, 2 or 3 years when your book about Obama first came out, Intimate Portrait. And I was thinking about it. I was like, wow, this guy spent most of his life kind of like being a fly on the wall, documenting these situations. And now you're in this situation where you're public speaking to like hundreds, thousands of people. For most people, public speaking is like, they say it's like it's their worst nightmare. It's like,
Well, there was a time where it was my worst nightmare. I mean, I think back to even after I had worked for newspapers for 4 or 5 years, and I did some public presentations in terms of like at photo conferences and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to go back to those, I was terrible. They were terrible just because I didn't know how to connect with an audience, and I was still really nervous about it. Again, I think it's just something over time you sort of learn how to do. You learn how to connect. I feel now that I can put together a good presentation for whatever audience, and sort of can get a feel for how to make it work and how to connect with the audience. Now, I got to admit, it's harder to do on Zoom. I mean, I've done a few Zoom talks where, there's 100 people listening or more. And those are hard because you don't get that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And you hope that you're still connecting in a way that people haven't tuned you out.
Yeah.
So that's been challenging for Zoom, but in person, I sort of feel that I have a good feel to how to make a talk or a presentation work. I mean, it also helps when you're showing photographs, right?
Because it's something to
less
talk
about you, and people are more looking at the photographs on the screen, and so that's kind of helpful.
Yeah, I went to your presentation, and I don't know why I thought this. I showed the presentation. I'm like, oh, this is going to be like a bunch of people that love photography, like other photographers. And I realized, like, wow, no, these photos that you took meant so much more to so many people. It's not just photographers. For you, has it been interesting to travel the world and kind of show this 8 years of documenting one person? Like, has it been interesting getting to connect with people and see how the photos have kind of affected them?
Yeah, and it's, because if you're going to come to one of my talks, you're sort of a like-minded individual in some ways. I think I had one heckler.
Really?
In all the talks that I've done. And or maybe a few people that were just, curious and not really fans of President Obama.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, I'm speaking to like-minded people. And I think it's a way to connect with them, and on an almost emotional basis too. And especially given, the current climate in our country.
Yeah.
And really, I'm just kind of reminding people this is what it was like, during this administration, and this is the way I saw it. And I think people appreciate sort of reliving those days, but also sort of learning some things. I mean, we made a lot of pictures public during the administration, but people were not like looking at, the Flickr photo stream or whitehouse.gov every day. So most people are not familiar with all of the photos. They might be familiar with one or two if they, sort of went viral on social media or something like that. But for the most part, they haven't seen these photographs. So it's giving them an inside window into, this particular presidency.
Definitely. And I think being able to view it in a book format, where you've like curated it and edited it, and it's a lot easier to digest than looking at like photos on a Flickr account or something like that. It was just kind of interesting. Even myself, I mean, I followed your work for years, and I did look at the Flickr. I was one of the people looking at the Flickr, but it was amazing to kind of see it all condensed in one book and edited together,
Well, I mean, the book for me was, was something that, as soon as I left the administration, I thought I should, try to do. And if I was going to do it, I was going to put the best book together that I could. And, fortunately, I partnered with a publisher who sort of gave me the leeway to do the book that I wanted to do, and to also make sure that the quality of the book, in terms of the printing and the kind of paper, so that the photographs would look really great in a book format. So, I'm really proud of that book. I'm proud of the way the photographs look. It was really cool to see them on nice paper, right? Because, like you say, it's different looking at pictures online where you're just, clicking through them. But when you see them in a book format, they sort of take on a new life in some ways.
Definitely. And I guess to go back, like, when you kind of like first got out, when you got out of college and you're kind of interning at the AP, at that point, was it kind of your goal to be a newspaper photographer? Or did you kind of have a goal in mind of like what type of photography you wanted to do at that point?
Yeah, I mean, when I left BU, I think I applied for two newspaper jobs, didn't get them. I went back to South Dartmouth and was trying to did a couple, like, I guess we call them stringing assignments, freelance assignments for the hometown newspaper, the New Bedford Standard Times, for which I was once a paper boy.
Wow.
Delivering newspapers. But they wouldn't hire me as full time. So yeah, I think right away was gravitating towards newspapers. And when I went to Kansas State, it was, great working for the college newspaper. And then I worked for, when I left Kansas State, I worked for two fairly small newspapers in Kansas. And I loved it, sort of, it was, and it was, I loved it. And it was challenging because, especially the second newspaper I worked for was just a small town, and I was the only photographer. There was no wire photo machine. So, every day I was responsible for 3 photographs: page 1, the sports page, and a business section photo. And, when you're in a small town, when not a lot goes on, that was like, that was challenging. And it made me learn how to make something out of nothing. Take what sounds like a boring assignment and try to make an interesting photograph out of it.
And were you processing all
there's some days where I missed that. Although I got to say, in terms of like pressure jobs, that was a pretty pressure job. Having every day to come up with 3 photographs that you are going to put your name under. So,
were you processing all your own film and everything at that point? Like, what was this?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, there was one time when the high school football team made it to the state playoffs, which, was like a rarity for them because they were such a small school. And the playoff game was I think it was like 60, 70 miles away. And it was on a Friday night. And of course, we put out a Saturday morning newspaper. And the deadlines were such that, the editor was telling me, well, you're going to have to leave at halftime in order to make the deadline. I go, I can't leave at halftime for a playoff game.
Yeah.
We got to find another way to do this. Yeah. So I talked this friend of mine into driving his truck with me to the game. And I stayed the whole game. They lost. So I got some pictures in the locker room.
Yeah.
And got back in his truck and developed the film in the truck.
Wow.
I had it like all set up so that I was able to develop the film. And then as soon as I got back to Chanute, to the office, I was able to go right to the darkroom and make a print, of so we made we made the newspaper with a reaction photo to the loss of the game, which was the reason that I wanted to stay till the end of the game, win or lose.
Yeah, that's where the action happens. That's amazing. And then I think you spent some time in Chicago. I believe you worked for the Chicago Sun-Times and then the Chicago Tribune. How did you kind of end up moving out there? How did that kind of come about for you?
One of the things that happens is it's pretty small community, the photojournalism community. I mean, it's probably bigger now, but this is in the day where there was a lot of word of mouth. And so I was working for this small paper in Kansas, and one of my friends was Dave LaBelle, who was had worked for, I don't know, it seems like dozens of newspapers and was pretty well known. And he had gotten a call from the photo director at the Chicago Sun-Times, and he said he wasn't interested in going to work there. And the director said, well, do you know anybody else I could call? And, that would be good for this job. And Dave, recommended me. So I get this phone call in the darkroom one day from Henry Gill, who was the photo director at the Sun-Times. And like, I had no idea this was coming. And he just like, we want you to come to Chicago and interview. And I'm like, I'm trying to make the deadline, man. You call me at a bad time.
I'm putting this print in Fixer right now, man.
Right, exactly. And I think I said, look, I'll call you back in an hour or something like that. And so that's how that all happened. I mean, and so I went to work in Chicago, and that was great. I mean, because I went from a 6,000 circulation daily newspaper to a 600,000.
Wow.
Circulation newspaper. I went from being the only staff photographer to, a staff of, I don't know, we had 20 photographers maybe.
Holy cow.
John White was there, Richard Dirk, Perry Riddle, Al Seib. I mean, it was a great staff, and it was, I loved it. And I figured this is it, man. This is where I want to be. I thought I'd be there for a long time.
What was kind of that's one thing I was kind of curious about, like, being that there's like 20 photographers, what was kind of the culture like? Was it a competitive environment? Did you kind of view yourself as a competitive photographer? Obviously everyone wants to like get their photos on the front page and things like that, but what do you remember about this, like, I guess the culture of like work?
Yeah, it was competitive, but there was a camaraderie. I remember, when I was there, John White won the Pulitzer, and, we were all drinking champagne, and, it was such a great, everybody was so proud of John because he worked so hard. And, but, sure, you wanted to get the best assignment. When there was a big assignment, you wanted to be involved in the big assignment. And, so there was, competition in that kind of sense, and and having the Tribune, literally across the street with twice the number of photographers.
Wow.
Much bigger circulation. So it's sort of like David and Goliath. So we always like felt we were competing against them.
Yeah.
In a big way. And so there was that sense of competition. So.
And what kind of stuff were you like photographing at the newspaper? Was this kind of all over the board, or were you always kind of photographing politics, or what do you kind of remember about some of those like early days of working at the Sun-Times, I guess?
Yeah, the Sun-Times, pretty much everything.
Yeah.
News, sports, features. I went to a lot of Cubs games. Seems like in terms of sports, I covered the Cubs more than anything, as I recall. Although I did go to White Sox spring training one year, and I think I covered a lot of the Bears games.
Did you enjoy shooting sports?
What's that?
Did you enjoy shooting sports?
Yeah, I enjoyed shooting sports for sure. At the time, you know, I was there at a bad time in terms of Chicago sports. I don't think any of the teams are really that good. Certainly the Bulls were not that good because, you know, they didn't have Michael Jordan yet.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed sports and, you know, features, news, pretty much right across the gamut.
Yeah, I really enjoyed. There's a series of photos on your website from Wrigley Field, and it's not even the action; it's a lot of this details, the experience. Like, there's an amazing photo of there's this girl like in the bleachers, and they're like spraying water on her, and this really amazing photos. Like, how do you kind of approach like photographing when you're trying to tell a story? Like, do you kind of go in with a plan when you get an assignment of like how you want to execute it, or do you kind of just let the day unfold, or how do you kind of approach assignment work, I guess?
I mean, I think every situation is different. I mean, the Wrigley Field series was actually photographs I did, you know, many years later when I was working for the Chicago Tribune. But I was based in D.C. and they knew I had a love of baseball. We're going to do a book on Wrigley Field. Why don't you come to Chicago for like you know, I think I was there for 6 weeks, basically rented an apartment and just went to every game. I didn't cover the game. I just like looked for like cool pictures. So it was they, you know, they gave me free reign to do the kind of pictures I wanted to do. And somebody else was, you know, covering each game, but so I didn't have to do that, which was, you know, great. Matter of fact, I shot all that on color slide film, that project. And this would have been in 2001. The last game that I photographed was on September 10th, and I had a flight out the next morning or the next afternoon. And I remember getting a call at the hotel from the photo editor saying, instead of flying to home to DC, where I lived, we want you to get on a plane and go to New York. And I go, why? Like, this was like maybe a half hour after the planes had hit the towers.
Yeah.
And I had slept late that morning. So I had no idea what the heck he was talking about.
Got it. Wow. So they sent you to New York to kind of document the.
Well, of course, you know, that all flights were canceled. So I ended up renting a car. And as I'm driving, they're trying to make a decision. Should I go to New York or go to DC? And like, I finally got to the point, I think I was on the Ohio Turnpike, where I called them and I go, you got to tell me, you know, which exit am I taking? Like, am I going, you know, more north to New York, or am I going to DC? And I ended up going to DC for, I think, a week, maybe not even a week. And photographed, you know, the aftermath at the Pentagon, and Bush at the White House, and but then I ended up going to New York for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, something like that.
Yeah,
I was not there for the, you know, for the main part. By the time I got up to New York, I mean, access to Ground Zero was kind of closed off.
Yep.
And
lost you there, Pete. Oh, there you go. Sorry, I froze there for a second. And was politics something you were always interested in? And like, how did you kind of start photographing politics? I guess I know you ended up working for the Reagan administration. Like, was photographing politics and covering that world something, was a goal of yours, or how did you kind of get into that, I guess?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say it was a goal. I mean, it's funny. I was not really overtly political, but I sort of liked, you know, the whole process of covering politics. I mean, I remember when I was at the Kansas State Collegian and photographing the student council meetings that, you know, were kind of boring and stuff, but trying to make interesting pictures. Matter of fact, the student body president was a guy named Sam Brownback, who later became a U.S. senator and governor of Kansas. And then when I went to Chicago, the Sun-Times, obviously politics was really important in that city. So I covered a lot of politics. It wasn't like my beat, or it wasn't like the one thing I always wanted to do, but there were some interesting characters. Jane Byrne was the mayor at the time. I was there when Harold Washington ran for mayor, and the city council was just there was so much color at the city council meetings. I covered Adlai Stevenson when the third, when he ran for governor and lost. So I covered a fair amount of politics, but it wasn't like, this is what I want to do, cover politics. It was sort of like one of the many things many subjects I was covering, in addition to sports and news and features. And, the Reagan White House was just another out of the blue phone call from the White House photo editor, somebody that I knew professionally. And, she just called me up one day and said, "Hey, we want you to apply for this job. Michael Evans, Reagan's chief photographer, is looking for somebody to work with him. And I suggested you." And, and I was like, I was doing so great in Chicago. I told her I'm not really interested.
Wow.
And I went home that night and I was like, why am I like not, considering this? Like, what does it matter whether I like Reagan or not? Imagine being on the inside of a White House. And I figured I'm never going to get this opportunity again. So, I called her back and I said, "Okay, I'll come and interview." And, they ended up hiring me, and I spent the last, I guess it was 5.5 years of the Reagan administration, photographing the presidency from the inside. Now, my access was a little different. I mean, Michael was only there for the first term, and then the second term, there wasn't really a chief photographer. There was sort of a rotation basis amongst the other official White House photographers. But, I tried to push for as much access as I could. And, and I think there's not on a daily basis, but I think that I did a pretty good job given the, hurdles, I guess, if you will, in terms of access to make some, revealing behind the scenes photographs.
How was your relationship with Reagan? Was he kind of open to being photographed? Do you feel like it's something he hated?
I mean, yes, yeah. I don't think that. I don't think that there was ever a time where he didn't want me there. It was more the staff trying to be the gatekeeper, right, to these secret classified type meetings. And so it wasn't him necessarily.
Because wouldn't they set up shots, the communications department would set up shots and bringing lighting to kind of fake scenarios sometimes, pretty much?
Not for me. I mean, it was more that was their approach with. You have to go back to the 80s when there had been this sort of transformation where the news magazines went from black and white to color, right? And nobody was using color negative film. It was color slide film, which, is an unforgiving film with, really you couldn't go above ISO 100 and get a good picture quality wise. And so usually what would happen is if Time or Newsweek needed a picture for the week, for the story they were doing, the photographer for that magazine would get 15 minutes, right? You'd get a 15-minute window to photograph the president. And so that's where the sort of lights came in, where things were lit up and it was kind of set up. "Mr. President, can you do this? Can you do that? And can you be reading papers?" Unfortunately for me, as a White House photographer, I wasn't necessarily, there were a few times where I had to do that. But really not with lights. It was, there's a scene in this documentary film that's coming out where I'm orchestrating a photograph of the Reagans at the ranch, for instance. and it's intended to just show him, at the ranch while he was on his summer vacation. So there were, those occasions, but for the most part, I was able to just make candid pictures of what was happening. It's just that my access wasn't as great as it was in the next time I was at the
Yeah, and that's an interesting point. I was kind of interested in talking to you about when you're working as the White House photographer and you're covering like the president. Do you still like view yourself as like a photojournalist the same way you would as working for a newspaper, or is there different roles with each? Like, how do you kind of view the job and the way you approach it, I guess?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. And I know that people object to referring to me sometimes as a photojournalist, being the official White House photographer. But I mean, it's not, well, there's two things. One, it's not like I like suddenly, when I walk into the White House, make pictures any differently.
Yeah.
You're a photographer, and you make pictures the way you make pictures. It doesn't really matter whether you're working for a newspaper or you're inside the White House.
Mm-hmm.
That said, there's also, in terms of documenting for history, there's a lot of, let's say, boring meetings that take place that, and people come in and they sit in the same chair or sit on the sofa in the same exact place that they did the day before and the day before and the day before. They're just talking about different things. And so as the official White House photographer, even though this situation is pretty damn boring, you still have to document it in such a way that you want to have at least some pictures that show who's actually in the room during this meeting, right? Mm-hmm. That's important for history, context. And so I think there was a certain amount of not forgetting, who's in the room, and making sure that that's incorporated into your photography. Whereas if you were, working for a newspaper in that situation, you're just going to go zoom right to the main part of the picture. Mm-hmm. Like if it's just a close up of the president, or, there's like maybe the Secretary of State is in that meeting and he's under fire for something. As the newspaper photographer, you're going to like zero in on that. So you're thinking longer term, I think, is probably the main difference in terms of the way I approached it.
Yeah. And is there like anything you feel like you learned from your experience working in like the Reagan administration that you applied to your job with the Obama administration?
I think it was that coming in, I had to like establish my access right away. And it wasn't President Obama. I mean, I had known him for 4 years and we had a professional relationship. He understood the value of having somebody visually document his presidency, and sort of gave me carte blanche. But at the same time, there were two, I wouldn't call them obstacles, but two things that I was very aware of, having been in the Reagan administration. One, it's one thing to say, yeah, you can have access to everything, but put yourself in his shoes. Imagine having, some guy following you around every day, all day, snapping photos. Like, that takes a little getting used to.
Yeah.
So I wanted to like approach that in a way that it wouldn't annoy him, and he would become comfortable with it, and he would understand why I needed to always be there. So that was one thing I was very aware of. Two, I was going to hold my ground against the staff, like against anybody who was, trying to thwart me from having access to any kind of meeting or situation.
Is that something you fought with a lot early on, or did it kind of take a while?
I don't know that I fought that much. I mean, there's one particular person who, like, there was like a situation room meeting when highly classified, where he was like, you can't be in here. You can't be in this meeting. And I go, well, why not? He goes, you don't have the right security clearance. And I was like, okay, that's a legitimate response. So how did I handle that? I went to the chief of staff of the National Security Council and I said, here's the kind of access level I need.
Yeah.
And I did all the paperwork. I got the interview and I got the highest security clearance I could get so that I could be in all those meetings. So it was, things like that. And those are things that, like, I think if I had, in the Reagan administration, I wouldn't have had the confidence to, like, say, no, I can be in this meeting. And if you say I can't, I'll find a way to make sure that I am.
Yeah. And do you feel like, being that you had already been working as a working photojournalist for like decades at this point, because I believe, like, by the time you start with Obama, you're probably in your 50s or so. Do you feel like if you're in that same position as like a young 20-year-old photographer, you feel like you got like a little more respect from this point in life you were at, and being like, even that you're a little older than Obama, do you feel like he gave you a different respect, I guess? I don't know.
Well, I was definitely, more confident, and I can be pretty stubborn in my, I think as you get older, like, no, this is the way it's going to be, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, and I think, and I think that President Obama was, what was basically my support. Like, he had my back.
Mm-hmm.
And he understood the value, and it didn't bother him that I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes a huge difference. I mean, one of the things that hopefully I can help contribute to with the next administration is that whoever becomes the next, White House photographer, that I can make sure they understand why they need to have that access. And I know enough of the Biden people that I'm probably going to, like, initiate some phone calls after the election and say, hey, you got to have somebody that you trust, and that you're going to let them document this presidency for history.
Yeah, very, very
because
important.
access is just so important.
Yeah, be a first woman vice president, a monumental time in history. So yeah, definitely important to document all those moments for sure. And the thing, I read an article that was on sportsshooter.net in 2008 that you wrote, and it was interesting. When you first started photographing Obama, you photographed him from day one in the Senate. And I found it interesting. You said early on this, like in the first few days, you had in the back of your mind that this guy might be president. And you said, I believe, that you were documenting him in that way. Like in your mind, you're like, this guy might be a president. So you're approaching it that way. Like, what do you remember about those, like, early days, and what do you kind of mean about, like, this approaching it like that way?
Yeah, I did say that, and that was my outlook. And, like, you wouldn't be asking me this if he didn't become president.
Yeah.
So, sort of like, I was joking to some of my friends yesterday, because, like, I always make these political predictions and I've never been right. But I gotta say that I got the Biden Kamala ticket right.
Okay.
I've been saying that for a year. Even when Biden was sinking in the polls, I was still saying that was going to be the ticket. So I did say that about Senator Obama, and and I was thinking like, I've got this picture like on his, I don't know if it was his first day, it was the first week in the Senate where he got like this, the first office he got was a temporary office in the basement of
No
a
windows.
Senate Dirksen building. And,
Yeah.
and he's got no windows. He's got these fluorescent lights, computer wires on the floor. And I was, as I made that picture, I was like, this will be a great contrast if he ever makes it to the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. That's, I was, thinking that. And then, there was another time when in 2000, later that year in 2005, I went on a congressional delegation trip with him and Senator Richard Lugar to Russia and a couple other countries. And, at one point he went for a tour in Red Square, with the Kremlin right out in the background and St. Basil's Cathedral. And, was walking around and like nobody knew who he was or recognized him. And I was so conscious of trying to make a picture that just showed him in that scene with like nobody even paying attention to him.
Yeah.
Because I knew if he ever did become president, that scene would take on a different outlook. It would never happen again.
Yeah, totally. And I believe in 2006, you even traveled to Kenya and you guys went and visited the village where Barack Obama's father was born. I was kind of curious, what was that trip all about? And what do you kind of remember about it? Because that seems like a pretty powerful moment for him, just going back to where his father was born.
Yeah. So it was his grandmother's village. Yeah. I'm not sure if his father was born there. I can't remember, but that was, there was a lot of attention even by then in Kenya. There was a lot of excitement about him being, a U.S. senator. So that there were like thousands of people out for that trip. And kind of like everywhere he went, he did like a public AIDS test in a field, and a mobile clinic at a field, and there were like people in the trees, trying to get a glimpse of him. And then at his mother's village, it was supposed to be kind of like this little private visit, and there were like hundreds of people. It was very chaotic. And yeah, it was kind of that was an interesting trip for sure.
Yeah, you ended up publishing a book, The Rise of Barack Obama, which I believe was just all photos of his time in the Senate, and pretty interesting. You had a hard time getting that book published. It sounded like because you were working at the.
Well, I was working for the Chicago Tribune when I made most of those pictures, and then I left the Tribune, and in the middle of the 2007. So just right at 3 months after he started his presidential campaign, I left the Tribune and I went to teach at Ohio University. And the Tribune didn't want to let me publish a book. And I finally wrote to the editor and I go, this is unfair. I go, you let writers who have done stories for the newspaper, you let them do a book based on the reporting that they did when they worked for the newspaper. You can't be different for a photographer. That's just not fair. And there was a lot of back and forth, and the real sticking point was they were afraid of opening a can of worms. And I go, what do you mean? They go, well, if we let you do a book, then other photographers want to do a book. I said, yeah, but if somebody's publishing a book about any subject, let's say it's Senator Obama, you would then license images that I had shot, right? And they go, well, yeah. I go, well, what if I license my own images?
Yeah.
And they were like, the bell went off. It was like, that would cover them. And so I paid a license fee to them.
Wow, you had to pay for
to use my own pictures in a book. Yeah.
That's interesting. And you said you were teaching at Ohio University. Like at that point, did you think your days of like working as like a working shooting photographer were done? Like, what did you think you're gonna do at that point? Just be teaching, or what was kind of your mindset?
Well, I mean, part of it was, I was sort of, in my early 50s then, I guess, or just turned 50.
Yep.
And I was in my early 50s, and I had become disillusioned with the Tribune. They had been bought by a real estate magnate, and it just didn't seem like the place I wanted to be anymore.
Yeah.
And I just thought that I was too, old to get another newspaper job. And I had freelance for 9 years, and it was that I was just not good at freelancing. There were so many ups and downs that I just didn't want to do that. So that's why I took the teaching job at Ohio University, and I figured, okay, I can do this, and then in the summer I'll try to do a project every summer. But I wasn't going to be doing daily shooting.
Yeah.
Now, but throughout the time I was at OU, if Senator Obama was on the campaign trail, was in Ohio or nearby, I would make arrangements and go photograph the event. And I went to the convention in 2008 on my own, and then I went to Grant Park election night. I flew up from Ohio, and just things I did on my own to continue my coverage of him. And unfortunately, I still knew a lot of the people on the campaign, and they always gave me the right credential to be where I needed to be. I didn't have behind the scenes access, but I had pretty good access in terms of the press news photographers. And then, I remember after the election, I sort of waited maybe a week, and and I figured that Callie Shell had been like assigned for Time magazine to cover the campaign, so she had been on the campaign for a year, and so I figured that he was going to either hire her or me. And I remember I sent about a week after the election, I sent Robert Gibbs an email, and all it said was, I don't even think I think it was just in the subject line. I wish I had a copy of that email. Maybe I do somewhere. I don't know. But I sent an email to Gibbs, and it just said, "I'm interested." That was it.
Yeah.
And then, one thing led to another, and then they called and offered me the job.
And once you got the job, like, did you kind of like think about how you wanted to approach documenting his administration? Did you go back and look at a lot of the work of previous White House photographers, or how did you kind of just approach your overall photographing him, I guess?
No, I purposely didn't want to go back and look at other White House photographers because I wanted to have a fresh eye. But I was very familiar with other White House photographers. So, I mean, for me, it was, the person that I always looked up to as the best official White House photographer in history is Yoshi Okamoto, who was LBJ's photographer. He had total access to LBJ, and LBJ was a completely different character, a very crude individual in many ways. But it was sort of that approach, that where you're just always there, you're always making pictures, you're documenting everything. That was what was in the back of my mind.
I actually read an article. I was researching Yoshi because I know you have a lot of respect for him, and I'm not sure if it's true. I read it. He actually got fired at one point in the administration briefly, and then LBJ hired him back because I guess there was like a Newsweek article about Yoshi, and it was talking about how much film he shot. And I guess LBJ didn't like them. He thought it was wasteful for how much negatives he was shooting or something that I read. I don't know if it's 100% true, but
yeah, no, I think there's some truth to that. I know his son who I've communicated with a little bit, is working on a book about his dad. So, because there's still a lot of, to me, a lot of unknown. I mean, the one thing about being the official White House photographer then is, there was no social media or internet, and so people weren't familiar necessarily with him as an individual. And it's there's that he's one of the few official White House photographers that never did a book. I mean, most of us have done a photo book. After we left the job, and Okamoto never did. And so I'm not sure if his son's book is a photo book or what, but his pictures are so amazing, and his access was so good that I hope it's a photo book.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I was kind of interested in talking to you about is looking at the book. There's a lot of these moments you're photographing Obama in these intense situations. Like a couple that stick out in my mind is you photographed. He went to Walter Reed Hospital and photographed this soldier, Corey Remsburg, I believe was his name. And like, how do you kind of deal with those situations where this guy, he's obviously been wounded very badly. It's a tense situation. How do you kind of approach photographing those situations? Like, do you kind of get in, get out quick, and how do you kind of just deal with the intensity and emotion like in those situations, I guess?
Well, I mean, a lot of those situations, like President Obama went every 3 months. I think it was every 3 months, maybe it was every 4 months to Walter Reed. And especially in 2009, 2010, there were a lot of badly wounded military personnel, wounded in Iraq or Afghanistan, and it was hard to see. I mean, hard to see, guys missing legs and limbs, and it was, kids in their 20s with, and oftentimes with a new family, and, and just the sacrifice was some of them were really hard to be in there for. And the way it would work is he would walk in the room, and it would be essentially me, one Secret Service agent, and then someone, either his military aide or a civilian that was the liaison to the military. And so it's very, sort of intimate situation, and as I said, it was oftentimes hard to see these kids in this condition, and it really brought home the cost of war. That there's people die, but people also get really badly injured, and that's with them for the rest of their life. So you're thinking about that. I mean, the thing that struck me about Corey was, he had this really traumatic brain injury. He was hit by an IED. The guy that was walking alongside him was killed instantly, and Corey had been thrown into a ravine face down, almost drowned in the water. His brain had been pretty much, was wide open, and it's lucky that he lived. But what really struck me is we're in this hospital, and it turns out that President Obama had met Corey, I think it was like 7 months before at D-Day in Normandy. Corey had been one of the Army Rangers that had parachuted in, ceremonially, and had met with President Obama. And I had a picture of that greeting. And, we had sent, as we often did, we had sent prints to the family. from that greed and Normandy. And the pictures, I think there were 3 pictures we had sent, and they were taped to the hospital room wall. And I'm like, it sort of like took me aback. So here's this young strapping Army Ranger, several months before, and my picture of him is on the wall. And then here's Corey in bed, just a shell of himself. And it was like, it really showed the starkness of the cost of war in such a visceral way. And I was shook up by it. And I think President Obama was too.
Yeah, and like another photo that really stuck out in your book for me was after the Sandy Hook tragedy. There's a photograph of Obama consoling the Wheeler family who had just lost their son Ben, and I guess like I can't imagine that situation at all. But like trying to photograph in that situation, because obviously at the end of the day you're a human being like anyone else, and that was just such a horrible event. Like how do you kind of like compartmentalize that situation to with everything going on and like still being able to do your job and document such a terrible day for that family and with Obama, I guess.
Well, I mean, this was the work. I mean, I had to do this too many times, I have to say. Between mass shootings and natural disasters, this was something that he did. I mean, I have to, certainly on a yearly basis, where something would always happen that he would have to console families. But this was the worst one, I think because 20 of the 26 people that were killed were first graders, 6 or 7-year-old kids. Like who does that? And this is 2 days after the shootings, and you can just imagine that these families were still pretty much in shock, and he spent time with each family. I'm not sure every family was there, but I think most of them were. He was going to then attend a public memorial service, but first he met with all the families individually. And and it was tough. I mean, I have a job to do.
Yep.
I don't want to make it uncomfortable for the people that he's meeting.
Yeah.
And so I was very selective in my in photographing. I didn't want to be a nuisance, and but wanted to try to capture this emotion. We didn't make any of the pictures public, but we sent copies to the families.
Yeah.
And when I was doing my book, this would have been what, 5 years later, I was doing the book. I was like, God, I really should try to include at least, one of these photographs of him consoling families so that people can see, that this is part of the job. And I went through my Newtown pictures, and I found this picture of the Wheelers, and I thought this sort of symbolized, all the other families that he had met with in a very visceral way. It was an emotional photo. And so I drove up to Newtown and spent an afternoon with the Wheelers, and showed them what my book was going to look like. I think I had a dummy of it, and and I asked their permission to use the photograph, because I wasn't going to use it if they objected.
Yep.
And and they said that they would be honored. I mean, it's still, they still talk about their life as before and after. Before December, was it 12th or 14th, 2012, and after. And I'm sure all the families feel the same way.
Yeah, no, it was very intense, but important picture for people to see, I think. And I know I got to wrap up here. I guess like looking at your time with Barack Obama, the 8 years you spent with them, like what do you feel you learned most from like spending so much time with a person like that? Like looking back at everything you guys traveled the world, you documented all these crazy moments. Like what do you feel like you learned from him, I guess?
Um, I learned a lot from him. He's a decent human being. He, I think the presidency doesn't change who you are as a person. I think the presidency reveals who you are as a person, and certainly, I think that I was able to, through my photography show, reveal who he is as a person. He's compassionate, empathetic, thinks things through, maintains a fairly even keeled disposition, is able to juggle a lot of balls at the same time, works hard, knows that the words that come out of comes out of the mouth of the president really do matter. Knows that it's about us, not him. And not to say that he's a perfect person. None of us are. None of us are perfect. He's flawed like everybody else.
Yeah.
But I think he went about the job in the way that that future presidents should, in terms of listening to various viewpoints, knowing that facts are important, science is important.
Yeah.
And that not to forget that you're also not just president, but that you're a husband and a father, and you need to maintain that part of your life in a present way. And in a lot of ways, it's easier for a president to have that kind of a family life, because you kind of live above the store, if you will.
Yep.
And when he was a state senator, or even when he was U.S. senator, he was separated from his family every week, for 3 or 4 days, where he'd be in Washington and the family would be in Chicago, and he'd see him on the weekend. Whereas, working at the White House, you have dinner, for the most part, you have dinner with your family every night, unless you're, traveling.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, he's just he's just a just a decent human being.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky that I got to know him and photograph him, and still remain in contact with him. I think in many ways I'll probably be linked with him for the rest of my life.
Definitely. And when your job was the last day, it was finally over, did it take you a while to just kind of readjust to, like, quote unquote, like regular life, where you spent 8 years every day? I think I read for the first 5 years, you didn't even take a vacation day. Did it kind of, once it was kind of over, did it take you a while to just kind of readjust to your new life, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to explain unless you've been through it. But the way I approached the job, it was 24/7, 365 days a year for 8 years. So I was like completely worn out.
Yeah.
Both physically and mentally. I had completely put my personal life on the back burner. And not that people should feel sorry for me, because I did it to myself. I mean, I had staff that I could have called on to fill in, but my approach was I didn't want to miss anything. I always wanted to be there, because you don't know when history is going to happen. You don't know when images are going to happen. So I did this to myself. So don't feel sorry for me.
Yeah, you wanted to be.
But I was worn out, and so there was it was an odd feeling. It was sort of like, I remember having a countdown clock on my iPhone for just like, ready to be done.
Yeah.
But at the same time, once the election occurred in 2016, it took on a different feeling, because I was like, well, this new guy can't do the job.
Hell no.
He's not capable.
No.
And so it was relief on one hand, but there was a bigger sense of trepidation of, oh my God, what's going to happen to the country?
Yeah.
And in a much more different way than, if Hillary had gotten elected. One of my great regrets is the night before the election, we did an event with Hillary Clinton in Philadelphia, and her photographer Barb Kinney was there, and I'd known Barb for probably 30 years, maybe longer.
Wow.
And so I remember I said to her that night, I said, Barb, get some sleep for the next week, and then I'll call you, and we'll talk about, the transition.
Oh, man.
And it's sort of like, God, that's like, what an awful thing for me to have said, given the way it turned out. But I mean, I think everybody was thinking that, she was the next president.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess I'll wrap it up with this. I know you have a documentary coming out, I believe in September. It's called The Way I See It. I was kind of curious, what's that all about? Like, how'd the project come about, and like, what was kind of your involvement with the whole film, I guess?
Yeah. So let me talk about this in terms of like what the photo audience would be interested in, because I'm sort of on a embargo.
Oh, you can't talk about it? No worries.
So what I'll say is that, because I've read, when the trailer came out, there was, on one of the photo blogs, there was sort of like some bizarre comments about, me.
Yeah, because I wasn't sure if it was like a documentary about your life or just your career, but it sounds like it's something different. So
first of all, I didn't make the film. Right? It's like, I didn't make a film about myself.
No.
This is a group of filmmakers who came to me and said, we want to do this film about, how you've gone from being a White House photographer to this sort of vocal critic.
Yep.
Shade
thrower.
Yeah. And so, after thinking about it, I was like, okay. So I cooperated with the film. They do go into, sort of how I got started, some of the things we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And they found some really fun video of me during the Reagan years, which is like some of which I had not seen. And so that was like pretty funny to watch in some ways. And my participation was, I did, some interviews. They followed me around a little bit, and I didn't have editorial control over the film. but I was like, making sure that we were getting the best pictures, the still pictures. There's certain pictures I wanted to make sure were in the film and things like that. So yeah. And it's it's a difficult time to put out a film, just given COVID and
can't go to theaters.
And so they're trying to figure out the distribution of it, to be honest with you, right as we speak.
Yeah.
I don't even know what, I mean, they say it opens in theaters in September.
Yeah.
But, obviously there's only, I don't know, somebody told me there's like 90 drive-in theaters that are open across the country.
Yeah, I think it's
but, they're trying to figure out, like, after that, how does this how do people see this? And, I don't know yet how that, but people will be able to see it.
You're happy.
Sure.
You were happy with the final product?
I haven't seen totally the final product.
All right.
I've seen a rough cut.
Got
of
it.
it.
All right.
So,
well, I guess my last question, we can end it, Pete, because I want to take up your whole day. With everything you've done, working for Barack Obama, a guy who is the consummate optimist, ran on the hope. That was his phrase. Is Pete Souza still hopeful for the future with everything going on in the world now, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think I have to be, I went through Watergate, and we had the 60s, although I was just a little kid. I was alive when that was a tumultuous time in our history.
Mm-hmm.
And, we will get back. We will get back to normal. And I think we'll get back to being, the country that we were. But I think it's going to take some work, and it's certainly going to take people voting to make any changes. If it's fine. I love that people are out in the streets protesting, but as former President Obama says, it's not an either or, it's a both. You've got to protest, but you've also got to vote. If you want to make institutional change, you got to vote, and not just at the presidential level, but at the local level. We just had, state assembly primary election here in Wisconsin this week. And, and I actually voted absentee a couple of weeks ago. But, it's at the local level if you want to make institutional change. And so I just would encourage everybody to make sure you're registered to vote, make sure you have a plan. I'm actually partnering with Headcount. There's a lot of other organizations out there that can help you get registered or figure out a way to do mail-in or absentee.
Yep.
And especially during these times of COVID, it's going to be a challenging election, I think.
Yep.
But you can't just like stay home and not do anything. You got to have a plan to get out there and make your voice heard.
Awesome. Well, Pete, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. It was a real pleasure. And thanks for all the hard work you've done over the years, documenting Obama and everything else you've done. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
All right,
and let's hope the Red Sox can do a little better than they're doing right now.
It's looking rough right now, but hopefully, man. All right. Later, Pete.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's podcast and would like to support the podcast, you can go to our new Patreon page at patreon.com/thephotobanter. I'm going to be offering up different features where you can get the podcast episodes 2 days early, as well as getting promotion for your website or social media handles on the podcast. So if you've been enjoying the podcast and would like to support, definitely go check us out on patreon.com/thephotobanter. Your support is much appreciated, as I'm just hoping to keep this thing going and keep it growing and get more guests for you guys. And so thanks so much if you can support. And also just got to give a big thank you to photographer Pete Souza for taking the time to come on the podcast. Just an incredible photographer who has accomplished so much over the course of his career. his documentation of President Barack Obama's presidency was second to none. Just incredible work that he created and documented. Definitely urge you to go pick up a copy of Pete's book, Obama, An Intimate Portrait. Just kind of documents the 8 years of Obama's presidency. This incredible pictures. So definitely go check that out, as well as Pete's website, PeteSouza.com, and his Instagram at Pete Souza. And as always, I'll be having weekly podcasts available on iTunes, Spotify, our new YouTube channel, The Photo Banter. And again, if you feel like supporting the podcast, you can go check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/thephotobanter. Thanks so much and take care.